Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. It's been quite a while, so thank you so much for clicking into this video. Today I'll be sharing something incredibly close to my heart, which is my love story with my husband. It's a story that started in January 2020, and later this month we'll be celebrating our 3-year wedding anniversary. It's been over 5 years, so the excitement, challenges, and many heartwarming moments. If you aren't already, grab a cup of coffee or tea, get comfy, and let's dive into it. I'm gonna rewind and bring you back to the start of our story, which was in January 2020. We started thanks to DilMil. And for those who don't know, DilMil is a South Asian dating app. I have been on the app for some time, and I was open to meeting new people in person if I thought they might be a good fit. But honestly, I wasn't expecting anything life-changing to happen. And then in January 2020, I matched with this guy from Seattle, Washington. And here I want to provide some context. At the time, I was living in Vancouver, BC, and he was living in Seattle, Washington. We started talking, and I quickly realized that he was different. He was thoughtful, genuine, and so easy to talk to. But there was one big hurdle, which is that he lived in a different country. I couldn't help but wonder, how would this even work when I'm in Vancouver and he was in Seattle? And as we were chatting, he told me that he wanted to see me in person. I was shocked. No one had ever crossed the border or driven more than 2 hours just to see me. But that's exactly what he did. And it wasn't just about the drive. He was on his H-1B work visa at the time, which made things even more complicated. Getting a Canadian visa isn't easy in that situation. He had to go through a health check, biometrics, and pay all the fees. It was a whole process, but he did it anyways. He went through all of that just to see me. When we finally met, I still remember it so clearly. It was the last day of January 31st, 2020. I was so nervous, but also excited. I'll never forget him pulling up his car and getting out to greet me. He was shy, but also very polite, and it absolutely melted my heart. And for that first date, we went to a hot pot place called the Dollar Shop in Richmond, BC. I still remember sitting next to him, feeling this mix of excitement and curiosity. And at that dinner, we shared a lot of stories with each other. I probably talked way too much, but he listened very patiently. He made me feel heard, and that really meant the world to me. And one thing that surprised me during this dinner was how he ate all the food that I ordered. And this might be a good time to share that my partner is from a different culture. He is Indian. And from what I know, some Indians have strict dietary restrictions. And knowing that he ate everything, even food that I didn't expect him to, like animal intestines and weird looking vegetables, I was so touched by how open he was to trying everything that I loved. And to top that evening off, we shared the Dollar Shop's famous black ice cream. It was a sweet, literal, and figurative ending to a perfect night. So after hot pot, he stayed for the entire weekend. Over the next 2 days, I brought him to all my favorite places in Vancouver, from downtown to my workplace to Granville Island, and so many food spots that I've been wanting to check off my bucket list. That weekend was our first date. And looking back now, it felt like the start of something I never could have imagined, a relationship that would change my life forever. And after that weekend, we didn't wait long to meet again. So just 2 weeks later, it was the Valentine's weekend in February 2020. And this time around, I traveled to Seattle to see him. I still remember how we planned it out. When I mentioned I could come to Seattle, he offered to drive to Vancouver to pick me up. I was really touched by this gesture. He actually drove 2 hours to Vancouver to pick me up, and then we drove back together to his place in Seattle. That was a really memorable moment for me. That weekend was also unforgettable. He showed me his workplace, and because we both love running, we spent time running to different landmarks in the city of Seattle. It felt so natural, so easy, and so special. And after that time, 2 weeks later, we had our third date. This time around, we decided to do something completely different. We traveled to Whistler, BC for a weekend getaway. And we stayed there at the Scandinavian Spa, which is a beautiful, nature-focused health spa surrounded by woodlands. They're known for their hot and cold baths. And we even treated ourselves to massages. It was such a relaxing weekend, just soaking in the beauty and each other's company. And then it came March. I planned another trip to Seattle. But this time I decided to stay for a week because the COVID situation was escalating. Both of our workplaces had started to implement remote work policies, so it felt like a good time to spend more time together. But during that week, I think on the third or fourth day of my trip, the US and Canada borders closed due to the pandemic. I remember the moment so clearly. Everything felt so uncertain. But we both knew one thing. I wasn't going to go back to Vancouver anytime soon. With work from home policies in place, I decided to stay in Seattle. And that decision would shape this next chapter of our story. I know during the 2020 pandemic, a lot of couples either make or break their relationship. And honestly, I have the pandemic to thank for bringing us closer together. Because of the remote work policy at the time, I was able to stay in Seattle from March 2020 to March 2021. That year was transformative for both of us, both personally and as a couple. Personally, I went through a lot of changes. I transitioned to a new role internally at my organization, and I also continue volunteering for a nonprofit back in Vancouver. This kept me busy and connected to my roots. As a couple, we took some big steps. One of the bigger milestones was buying our first property together. I still remember going to tour so many houses, trying to find one that felt just right. And eventually we found a cozy 2-bedroom place in Bellevue, Washington. It was perfect, and it really felt like the beginning of our lives together. The pandemic also gave us the rare opportunity to spend so much time alone with each other, doing things that are both romantic and mundane. One thing that made me realize he was truly the one was how comfortable it felt to spend doing even the most boring things together. We slowly built a routine. On weekdays, we'll have our work, and in the evenings, we'll share a meal while watching an episode of The Office. On weekends, grocery shopping became a once-a-week ritual, and we will go for runs in the nearby neighborhoods to stay active. Even though everything was closed and I couldn't see anyone else during the pandemic, I didn't feel lonely because I was with him. As we talked about our future, we started thinking about how I could stay in the US after the pandemic ended. We both agreed that finding a job in the US would be the most practical solution, but it absolutely wasn't easy. I applied to numerous jobs, like more than 200, that I lost count. And most of the time I was met with silence, crickets, no replies, no feedback. It was discouraging, but I kept going. So when the offer finally came through in March 2021, I was ecstatic. It felt like all the effort was finally paying off, but also little did I know this was the start of another challenge, the process of getting my TN work visa to legally work in the US. It was the beginning of a stressful and nerve-wracking time. This next chapter of our story was a tough one when we had to navigate being long distance. And it all started when I was applying for my TN work visa at the US border. I'll never forget the day I went to the border for my interview. It was an exhausting and emotional experience. I was interrogated for 6 hours, only at the end to find out that I was denied. And the reason, to summarize, was because the job description that I applied for didn't meet the TN visa criteria. That day was miserable. I still remember it pouring rain, and I was escorted back to Canada by 2 border officers walking behind me. And because I didn't have a valid negative COVID test entering Canada, I was fined $6,000 and sent to quarantine in a hotel for 2 weeks. My offer to work at the US job was also rescinded, as my visa didn't work out. The worst part wasn't just being denied the visa. It was knowing that I'll have to be separated from my boo. He wasn't a permanent resident or a citizen of Canada, which meant he couldn't come to see me in Vancouver. After my quarantine, we had to figure out a way to see each other, despite the restrictions. That's when we found out about the Peace Arc Park near Bellingham. The park is unique because it straddles the border between the US and Canada. People from the US side could walk into the park without needing any documentation, while Canadians could enter the park by showing a passport or visa to ensure that they could re-enter Canada. It became a sanctuary for us, just like it did for so many other cross-border couples. The Peace Arc Park allowed us to meet in the middle, literally. Couples were allowed to set up tents, bring food, bring any musical instruments, and spend time together within the park boundaries. So every Sunday, that's exactly what we did. My boo would drive 2 hours from Bellevue to the park, while I'll take a 2-hour transit ride to meet him. We'll bring food, set up our little tent, and spend the entire afternoon together. We walked around the park, strolled to the shore, and just soaked up as much time together as we could. One of my favorite moments during this period was celebrating his birthday there. It wasn't fancy or elaborate, but it was heartfelt and special. Just being able to spend the day together felt like a gift. This routine became our lifeline from April 2021 to September 2021. Every week, rain or shine, he never once bailed on me, and we'll meet at the park. As the pandemic slowly dissipated, we began thinking about the next steps, how one of us could eventually stay in either Vancouver or Seattle so we could be together again. Looking back, those park days were challenging, but also incredibly meaningful. It showed me how much effort and love we were both willing to put into making this work. Even when we were separated by a border, we found a way to stay connected. The thing was, after my visa denial, I couldn't travel to the US, so we had to figure out another solution. The most sensible option was for him to stay in Vancouver, BC. And to make things easier when he visited, I decided it was time to find an apartment. And because we have already gone through the process of touring places when we bought our first home in Bellevue, Washington, this time felt a bit easier. In October 2021, I secured a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in Richmond, BC. That weekend was such a whirlwind. I remember moving into the new place over the weekend, and the following Monday, I started a new job at a new company. It was a lot, but it felt like a fresh start for the both of us. After I moved into the new apartment, he then traveled to Vancouver every weekend to spend time with me. Luckily, he had a team in Vancouver, so he was able to work from there for short periods of time, which made things a lot easier for us. It was during this time that we realized we were ready to take the next step in our relationship. In November 2021, he proposed in my home. It was such a special moment, and it felt like everything we had gone through together led us to that point. For our engagement photos, we decided to go back to Whistler. the first place we traveled to together just a year earlier. It felt full circle to celebrate our engagement in the same place where we have some of the earliest memories as a couple. In February 2022, we even tied our knot at a courthouse in Kent, Washington. Those months were such a beautiful chapter in our story. Even though the circumstances weren't ideal, we made it work, and in the process, we grew even closer together. This also got us thinking about what was next. Should we continue living in Vancouver or move to Seattle? For us, it was a pretty easy decision. I've always wanted to work in a new city. I will also put a link up here for you to check out my other video that I share why I moved from Vancouver to Seattle. And since he didn't have a working status in Canada, it made the most sense for us to be in Seattle. This was in July 2022. We began our new life in Seattle. At first, I tried to enter the US on a TN work visa again. This time with a more structured company and help from an immigration lawyer. But unfortunately, that visa was also denied, and I had to return to Vancouver. So ultimately, I entered the US as a dependent in July 2022. Returning to Seattle felt like coming home. However, this time round, there were some differences since it was no longer during the pandemic. Firstly, I transitioned internally at my company to a fully remote role based in the US, which was a huge win after the struggles I faced trying to secure a job here. Meanwhile, my husband went back to the office and we began building our lives together in Seattle. I even started a nonprofit in the Puget Sound, Seattle area, keeping me busy and engaged with the community. After 2 years of long distance and navigating visa challenges, finally living together was a dream come true. Yet we both knew the Seattle weather wasn't for us. Just like Vancouver, Seattle rains for most of the year. That's when we started dreaming of a warmer and sunnier place. In May 2023, that dream took a step closer to reality when I received an offer to join a company in the Bay Area in sunny California. It was a bittersweet decision. On one hand, I was very excited about the new opportunity and the prospect of living in a warmer and sunnier place. On the other, my husband still had his job in Seattle, which meant that we'll be separated for a while. We decided that I'll move to California first while we navigated a long distance phase until he was ready to make the move. So in May 2023, he drove down to California with me and helping me pack up most of the things I had brought from Vancouver. We managed our long distance arrangement by flying back and forth, either him to California or me to Seattle, staying together for a few days to a week at a time. That phase lasted for about a year, which made every moment we had together even more treasured. Also, 6 months into this chapter, we received a green card, which meant that we no longer had to depend solely on a job for legal status in the US. This milestone gave us an added sense of freedom and security, further paving the way for our future together. Then in June 2024, my husband decided to take another big leap. He quit his job in Seattle to pursue his own startup full-time. We're now finally living together in our tiny home in Palo Alto and building our lives here in the Bay Area. We embrace new challenges and cherish every day we get to spend with each other. Wow, what a journey. It gets me tear out when I talk about this experience that I've had with my husband. It's been full of ups and downs, long distances, and border crossings. Through it all, we have grown closer with each other and learned to value every second we spend together. Our story is proof that no matter the challenges, love finds a way. If you're in a mixed-race relationship or searching for that special someone, I hope our journey gives you hope and reminds you that distance, cultural differences, and hardships don't diminish the beauty of love. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of our story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more updates. I'd love to hear your thoughts or any similar experiences you have had in the comments below. See you next time.